Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Monday, November 15th, 2021, and today we're going to be talking about Senator Patrick Leahy from the state of Vermont announcing today that he will not seek re-election from the state in a very blue state, the first and only Democratic retirement for the 2022 midterm elections, effectively putting our retirement count at 5 Republicans and 1 Democrat. Now, taking a look at the 2022 midterms, the Democratic Party probably isn't expecting much at this point in time, understanding that they are coming from the position against the Republican Party where they are unpopular and likely to lose the House of Representatives. The Senate doesn't look too good for the Democrats at this point in time. In fact, in my most recent election projection, you can see that my projection for the United States Senate ultimately ends up with 54 Republicans to 46 Democrats. However, of course, this is something that can change overnight. It could change by the time we reach 2022, but to expect 4 gains for the Republican Party isn't exactly out of the question. But looking at the 2022 retirement list, you can see that Republicans are pretty much retiring in much more competitive states. Ohio, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, all states that have been competitive on the presidential level in the most recent election and throughout the 21st century. The state of Missouri has actually been competitive back in 2016 with this exact Senate race in which it was decided by a margin of less than 3 points. So overall, looking at the comparisons here, Democrats obviously in that advantage, knowing that they don't have a retirement from a competitive seat, but we'll talk about what the implications are of a singular retirement and why at the end of the day, we are still likely to see the same result, even though some Republicans might be a bit hopeful. And there could be reasons for that. Now, the first thing I want to address is that Vermont is undoubtedly a blue state, but I am going to show you some data that does show it in a red way, and that specifically pertains to the governor election in the state of Vermont. Now, on the same ballot that Joe Biden won the Vermont presidential election, you can see here that he won by a margin of about 35 points across the state, one of the largest margins we have seen for a Democrat nationwide in any singular state. On the same ballot, there was a ballot for governor of the state. Now, David Zuckerman was the lieutenant governor at the time. He ran against Phil Scott as the incumbent governor, and rather than perform as well as Joe Biden, Phil Scott actually outran the Democratic nominee. Now, as a Republican, it seems to be unheard of that Republicans could win in such a solid blue state, but the state of Vermont actually doesn't have that strong of a blue history. In fact, Vermont holds the longest streak of voting with the Republican Party on the presidential level of any other state across the nation. So looking at Vermont, it has a bit of an ancestrally Republican history. Phil Scott taps into that. He's a liberal Republican, and he did not vote for Donald Trump in the 2020 election. So looking at his margin here, a lot of that can probably be attributed to such stances. Now, looking at it, Phil Scott won by over 40 points across the state. David Zuckerman couldn't even break 100,000 votes. Joe Biden and Donald Trump both broke 100,000 votes when it came down to this election. So the Democrat, even as someone who was running on the same ballot as Joe Biden, could not perform nearly as well as Joe Biden did and actually underperformed Donald Trump in the state of Vermont. How interesting is that? So looking at that Republican, that red title here, and you can actually see this in 2018 in another Democratic wave year, or not necessarily saying 2020 was, but in another year beneficial for Democrats, you will see that Phil Scott won by a margin of 15 points across the state, arguably against a better Democratic contender, but overall the approval rating improved. And with this adjustment in approval rating and with this shift in overall support for Phil Scott, there has been some type of discussion about Phil Scott running for United States Senate. But he ultimately has decided not to, turning away from this. Same thing with Jim Douglas, the former governor of Vermont, and actually ran for Senate back in 1992. The only person who might actually run for Senate is Scott Milne, but at the end of the day, he's probably not going to win the Senate election, even if he does decide to run. And when I say probably not, we're talking about less than a 1% chance for a Republican to win this for a Republican to win this general election. It really just depends and who gets through this Democratic primary here. With Patrick Leahy and David Zuckerman both saying no, this leaves the list open to a pretty substantial one. The top name that we've heard so far is the name Peter Welch, a United States representative. He has been serving the state of Vermont, I believe, since actually Bernie Sanders entered into the United States Senate. I could be a little off about that, but I believe that Peter Welch is the current frontrunner across the map. Now, this is obviously just recently discussed as him being the go-to nominee, primarily because he is the sole representative, and typically speaking, these sole representatives tend to run for at-large Senate seats when they have the possibility of doing so. And I mean, he has the most name recognition, but this is all that has been discussed over the past day, with Patrick Leahy announcing that he's going to be retiring. So, looking at the electoral history of Vermont, Democrats have no reason to be worried. This cannot be said. The same cannot be said for Republicans in Pennsylvania, Ohio, or North Carolina. They absolutely will be in for some type of competitive seat for the Republican Party versus the Democrats, who really don't have to worry much about where we stand based off of our current map. I mean, looking at the Democrats in the state of Vermont, if that is their only retirement, they are going to have incumbents who have won before in the past as the people in office. Even more recent elections, such as Georgia, not Phil Murphy, that is not the state of Georgia, that is the state of New Jersey. Don't know why I said that. Raphael Warnock is going to be running for re-election. Michael Bennet is going to be running for re-election. Mark Kelly, Catherine Cortez Masto. So these are people that are going to be strong Democratic contenders, and they have all decided that they're going to run. The people who have not decided that they're going to run have said that they are going to be leaving office. Again, 5 Republicans: Pat Toomey in Pennsylvania, Rob Portman in Ohio, Richard Burr in North Carolina, Richard Shelby in Alabama, and Roy Blunt in the state of Missouri. As for the Democrats, they have Vermont. So this leaves us with probably 6 total retirements, and I say probably because we can expect the Republican nominee, or would-be nominee, Ron Johnson, to run in the state of Wisconsin. Now, he has not declared or even spoken on the race, more recently speaking. He remains in the potential column, and there actually have been no notable Republicans to file their bids for candidacy in the Senate election here, so we can probably expect him to run for United States Senate. But taking a look at the map here, obviously a hugely different competitive dynamic here between the Democrats and the Republicans when it comes down to their potential retirements and their total retirements across the United States. Every single other Democratic contender here, every single Democratic incumbent has announced that they are running for re-election besides Patrick Leahy. Beyond this, for some of these Republicans, we still haven't heard officially speaking from the candidate Ron Johnson in Wisconsin or the candidate John Thune in the state of South Dakota. Now, you can probably expect both of these people to run for United States Senate. It makes more sense than it does not. But people are up to make their own decisions, and Ron Johnson actually has already been pressured by President Trump, has already received his endorsement. The only thing preventing him from running is the fact that he made a promise back in 2016 to the voters/constituents that if he was elected, he would not run for an additional term. In addition, it doesn't seem like Ron Johnson actually likes his position in Congress and is more so there to serve the people that elected him back in 2010 and 2016. And I think that for 2022, it is very possible and very probable even that a Republican besides Ron Johnson could even win this Senate race, and the balance of power wouldn't shift, and Ron Johnson would get what he wants. But that is a big if. I do think that there is a very real possibility that Democrats have a sudden surge or individually a strong candidate in the state of Wisconsin that could result in a Democratic victory across the Senate election. Democrats vied for this seat in 2010 and 2016, actually losing the seat in 2010 with Russ Feingold as the incumbent at the time. He ran for re-election, or technically, to oust the incumbent in 2016 and lost yet again. He probably isn't going to run for 2022. But there aren't that many major implications with Patrick Leahy's retirement. It seems to add on to the list of retirements that have been building for the Democratic Party. There was a point in time where we thought that it was going to end up with potentially 7 Republican retirements and 0 Democratic retirements. But we now know that there is absolutely one. Patrick Leahy, as the senator from Vermont, will be the only Democratic retirement of the election season. I also find this to be a very interesting state itself. I mean, the state of Vermont is very much against electing Republicans across the nation in terms of the presidential level. In fact, taking a look at it in recent history, the last time it was deemed competitive might have been the year 2000, when Al Gore only won by 9.9%. 4 years later, John Kerry wins by 20, Obama then wins by 37. 2012 rolls around, Obama wins by 36, Clinton wins by 26. So It really never fluctuated besides the 2000 election. Taking a look at even 1996, Vermont had gone to Clinton by 22 points. In 1992, Vermont went by 16 points. But the interesting thing about that is that Bill Clinton actually was the first Democrat to win Vermont in such a long time. You can see that for long-lasting periods of time, even leading into the 1992 election, that the state of Vermont had been pretty solid for the GOP. Sometimes a 17-point margin, sometimes a narrow margin of 6%, sometimes 12 points in years prior. Nixon won by 26. Nixon won the first time by 9. In 1994, Lyndon B. Johnson won the state, but Richard Nixon won it in the year 1960 by a margin of 17 points. So all around, the state of Vermont might have used to have a Republican history, but absolutely does not now. And this benefits the Democratic Party by providing them with an open seat that they really don't need to spend money on. There is a possibility that Republicans do try to spend money on the state of Vermont, do try to contest the state, but that probably won't be doing them any service. They know the state is super partisan and super left-wing. It's sort of the equivalent of the Democratic Party's Wyoming when it comes down to voting record, when it comes down to partisan nature. So personally, I do not see much coming out of the state of Vermont in terms of competitive nature for the GOP, but it does, unfortunately for the Democrats, add to this longer list that has been piling up of retirements from the House of Representatives and retirements from the United States Senate. The United States Senate may only have a list of one big, but when added on to potentially 10 to 12 House retirements, things start to look pretty bad for the Democratic Party. Obviously, the Republican Party is much more at a disadvantage with these 5 retirements, but they're also working within the 2022 election season. This is not the 2020 presidential election where you are looking at Pennsylvania, Ohio, North Carolina. These are not circumstances in which you are looking at previous election results. It's going to be increasingly more difficult for the Democrats to win because the environment isn't as conducive as it was back in 2020. The Republican Party actually performed very well in the presidential election. I think they definitely outdid their expectations in the House of Representatives, maybe underperformed them in the United States Senate, but definitely did very well on the presidential level as well. The fact is, Donald Trump was about 40 to 50,000 votes away for being reelected as president of the United States of America. So it really came down to those swing voters. And that's extremely important to note, that the margins were very small in some of these states, and you are looking at them become competitive for 2022. I also do want to say that considering Joe Biden's excessive margin of victory, I am very intrigued to see what happens in the governor election and also in this Senate election. Now, there's no doubt in my mind that a Democrat wins the race. It's not going to be that type of competitive, but if it does narrow down, what does that say for Democrats that were demolishing Republicans across the state? What does that say for all of these potential candidates that want to run for future office if the race ends up narrowing up even in a state like Vermont? I think Vermont, while not necessarily individually the political powerhouse or center focus of this 2022 campaign season, or even the aftermath, but I am intrigued to see what happens in an open race in what is expected to be a red wave year, even though we are still analyzing a solid blue state. It's always interesting to watch the swings, and it's going to be very, very fascinating to see, if you ask me. Taking a look at Patrick Leahy's voting record, was he ever in a competitive seat? Well, Patrick Leahy actually is the longest-serving United States Senator still in office, and I think he ranks as potentially the 4th or even the 5th longest-serving senator in United States history. But has he had a competitive race? Well, not really. As we go through his long time serving in the United States Senate, you can see here that the last time he was in a competitive race seemed to be around the 1970s. 1974 was his first election, where he won by a margin of 3.1%. 1980 rolls around and Patrick Leahy wins by a margin of 1%. In 1996, Patrick Leahy wins by a margin of with a victory with 63%. In 1992, 54%. In 1998, 72%, and so on and so forth. The point being that Patrick Leahy has had a very solid race every single time. In fact, the person that seems to be considering a potential run in this Senate election is Scott Milne, and he was defeated by Patrick Leahy, with him only gathering 33% of the vote across the state. So the Republicans really have nobody to turn to, and when you're taking a look at the numbers here, besides Phil Scott, nobody really could win this seat. The ratings would absolutely change if Phil Scott decides to run for United States Senate, but he has already declined the offer and sort of put it to the side when it comes down to whether or not he's going to run. I think that Phil Scott is a very popular governor. There is no denying that. But for him to be in the United States Senate wouldn't exactly give Vermont voters the representation that they want. I do think that they are much more left-wing than they think they are. In addition to that, I also think that Phil Scott is not as left-wing as they might think. Phil Scott would also be forced to take some very national positions on issues such as abortion and other types of rights issues. So that's something to worry about too for the voters here. I think that overall, what we can expect from this retirement is that maybe there will be some type of spin from members of the right-wing media that this is some type of telling sign, this is some type of encouragement for a Phil Scott run. But I do not think he's going to run. He seems very content and very, actually maybe happy with this governor spot. And he knows that he can win it again. He has the possibility of winning it again. Taking a look at the United States elections in 2022, he absolutely can run for governor again, and it looks like he's going to. He is the current incumbent, and while he has not announced whether or not he's going to run for governor, if he does, he's going to unequivocally be a shoo-in. In fact, the Cook Political Report, Inside Elections, and Sabato's Crystal Ball all rate it either likely or solid Republican. As we move into this retirement phase, I think that we can move beyond this one Democratic retirement, and I think that we can understand that this is just a simple, not necessarily anomaly, because it is just a regular Senate race here, but I do think that we can move and pretty much characterize it as something that is going to be a non-issue and not super important, but we should still consider it to be a race that we can watch just for fun, just to see if there's any type of major swing, because if there ends up being one, it does have some very big implications for 2024, but that is a big if, and it seems as if the top Republican here is not going to run. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.